in Cloquet, we had more high school playoff thrill now on the hardwood between the Hibbing Blue Jackets and the Lumberjacks. First possession of the game, ball is stripped and taken away by senior Ava Carlson. She drives the basket and gets the foul to go. Three-point play gives Cloquet the early lead. Then it's the Blue Jackets' turn for points. Jory Anderson with the beauty of a pass to Tara Hartling, who gets the pull-up J to go. We're now tied at 4, but it was the transition game that was working for Cloquet tonight. Carlson again winds up with the ball down low and hits the mid-range jumper. It's good to go. Then later in the first half, Quinn Danielson waits and finds a cutting Carly Johnson, who goes opposite hand hook shot to extend the lead for Cloquet. The Lumberjacks advance to the next round of the section tournament with a 38-point win over the Blue Jackets. Final score of 57-20. Cloquet will play Grand Rapids in the section semis on Saturday. And on the other side of the Section 7 AAA bracket, top-seeded Rockridge took down Duluth Denfeld 72-44. While the 5th-ranked Hermantown Hawks fell to the 4th-seeded North Branch Vikings by a score of 72-44. Both of these winning teams will meet in the semifinal round on Saturday afternoon in Rockridge. So we got postseason playoff